This video is by Straight Goods News. SGNews.ca.
So, Navigable Waters Protection Act, the Conservatives are trying to change it to read Navigable Waters Act. I think that's the change in the language. And what they're trying to say is it has nothing to do about protecting environment, and I beg to differ. It's a strong piece of environmental legislation. Just like we know that the Fisheries Act was a strong piece of environmental legislation. We have these regulations in place, we have legislation in place, it's different names, but each one does its part to protect a particular aspect of the environment. This one was about navigable waters, and if you look at how it was written, it would actually trigger environmental assessment when certain things happen. So that's being stripped out, and the Conservatives won't talk about this because they don't want to talk about the environment. They don't want to talk about how the environment and economy work together. They don't want to talk about environment full stop, quite frankly. So truthfully, I'm almost reluctant to talk about the series of events where they've been changing the websites, because I'm worried in 10 minutes it's going to be different, because I can hardly keep up with what they're doing. First we had the minister's website under the FAQs. We looked, and the word environment was there 23 or 26 times, talking about how this act is there to protect the environment. Then I think the second step, the site was taken down, full stop. Now, to the best of my knowledge, it's back up, but the word environment's been stripped out. Well, you know what? There are other websites that talk about the Navigable Waters Act, like the Environmental Assessment Agency's site talks about the Navigable Waters Act, talks about how it's there to protect our environment. And the Conservatives just don't want to talk about this issue. They don't want to admit that it's about environmental protection. They stripped out environmental protection from Fisheries Act. They didn't just tweak the Environmental Assessment Act, they repealed it. You have to remember, they actually repealed the entire act. So they're going after each piece of environmental regulation we have. This is one of the last ones we have, and they're gutting it as well.
Now, they're describing navigable waters as only being a certain amount of lakes are just being completely cast aside. What rights, are certain lakes going to have certain assessment capabilities and others not because of these determinations?
That's a great question, and we need to do a little bit more analysis about how this bill is impacting which waterways and why. We have to sort of uncover why they're doing this, because if you look at what they're doing is they're saying only certain waters are now navigable waters under this act, and there's a whole whack of waterways that are no longer protected. And if we started to scratch the surface of which waterways and try and figure out why, and it appears that they're keeping waterways off the act where we know that there are going to be big energy projects. You heard my colleague Dennis Bevington stand up in the House, I think it was yesterday, and talk about the Slave River and talk about hydroelectric projects. Well, maybe that's why that one's left off the list. And then we know of other rivers where we think there may be a pipeline crossing, so that river's left off the list. It's going to take a bit more digging. It's hard to imagine that this bill was actually just introduced a few days ago. We're still catching up. We're still trying to figure it all out. But as you scratch the surface, you realize, oh, right, this is about making sure there's no environmental oversight for big energy projects. Well, I guess